everyone. Welcome back to the American Experiment podcast. My name is Grace Keating. I'm here with Kathryn Hinderaker.
Hello.
Episode 52. Thanks for joining us. Stay tuned for the second half of this episode. John Hinderaker is going to sit down with John Phelan and talk about the 160th anniversary of the Battle of Nashville, which was yesterday. That was Minnesota's single bloodiest day of the Civil War. Yesterday, we had a really cool commemoration ceremony over in St. Paul. I don't know if you want to recap that a little bit.
It was great. We had a speaker. I think he did a great job just talking about what the Battle at Nashville was. I don't know about you, but I never learned about this in school.
No.
I feel like we didn't really do state history.
Yeah.
Like I hear some states do a bunch of state history, like Texas.
Yeah.
They're really into their state history and they talk about it. You learn about it in school.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel like I had that experience. So this was it's all new to me, all new information. And I thought it was so cool learning about it. We posted some of the clips on our Instagram. So if you don't follow us yet, go follow us on Instagram, MN Think Tank. Posted some of the clips from that episode. You'll see it today.
Yeah.
But we aired some of them before so you could get prepared for that event. And it was great. We also
really
had some
cool.
like musical talents.
Yes.
A couple staff members performed.
Yeah.
Jill sang the national anthem beautifully.
Beautifully.
Bill played the trumpet.
Yes, taps.
It was
Very
lovely.
moving. It was lovely.
So
we
those
had a
were
color
great
guard
additions
there.
too.
It was really lovely. So
yeah, it was great and not
Yeah.
that cold.
and not that cold. Weather held up.
Yeah.
It was really lovely. And yeah, totally new to me. Like he talked, the speaker was Ken Flees, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. And he's from the Battle of Nashville Preservation Society. And he talked a lot about how this battle was so pivotal in the Civil War. And it just doesn't get talked about enough.
Yeah, who knew that Minnesota, for me, I didn't even know Minnesota had like a role really in the Civil War that was, at all worth mentioning.
Major.
Let alone this huge battle. So it was very interesting. I highly recommend stay tuned for that interview at the end.
Yeah. Note, we will not have an episode coming out next week. So Merry Christmas in advance.
It's Christmas.
Have you gotten your shopping done?
Oh, I'm done.
We are 9 days out, believe it or not.
I have not yet started. This would be like absurdly early for me to start, I will say.
Oh my gosh. You're just like stressing me out as you speak.
That is so
It's
funny.
literally next week. Are you aware of this?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Do you know what Amazon? They deliver like same day. You can get anything you want so quickly and like just run around. It's so much more fun to go to the mall on like Christmas Eve. Okay.
Are you kidding? That's like my worst nightmare is like Christmas shopping. Because I do it every year and I'm trying to not do it this year.
That is so funny.
Stress.
It's like in my blood. Like my parents every year both go like to the mall on Christmas Eve and get everyone's gifts. Like we are the procrastinators of all time.
You are stressing me out as you speak. This is insane.
A couple years ago, it was during COVID because I remember we were all masked up, which made it even funnier. A couple years ago, must have been, so 2020 probably. I was at the mall with my mom getting my dad's gift from her. And we're at Nordstrom. And we get in line. They have like the station where you can wrap your presents, after you buy them. We get in line and I kind of look in front and I'm like, wait a second. That guy looks like Dad. And I run up there and I'm like, oh my God, it's Dad. He's like 2 people in front of us at the gift wrapping station at Nordstrom on Christmas Eve. I was laughing so hard. I have the best picture of them posing with their Christmas Eve, like in their masks, their Christmas Eve gifts, because that's when we shop. That's what we do in the Hinderaker family.
Cute. Oh my gosh. Okay, so no.
Yeah, no, you are not started. But like, I have some lists. I think I know maybe like what I'll get, but I got some shopping to do.
That's so funny. Anyway, besides that, how are you doing?
Oh, good. I'm just like, feel like I'm really in the holiday spirit. I'm like, I put on yesterday the like fake fireplace.
Dude, every night. That's on my
Seriously,
TV.
you do that too?
Literally every night.
I love the fake fireplace. So I put it on and then I'll play like my Christmas music through the speaker and have the little fireplace.
That's describing, every day for me right now.
Yeah. I'm just in a good mood. And I also, so yesterday, okay, this is going to take some backstory because I'm not typically on TikTok, but I am trying to make my dog TikTok famous. We just lost like 7 listeners. But I am thinking that my dog is like the cutest dog ever, right? And so
As he is.
If there's any dog making money on TikTok, and I think there is, it should be my dog. So every once in a while I go on TikTok and I post a video of my dog that's pretty cute. So far he hasn't blown up. I really think that like maybe this is my path to financial freedom. Like my dog.
Little side hustle. I love it.
Little side hustle. Anyway, I was on TikTok and I saw this new trend that I absolutely love, and I've been singing it all day because it's I like my suitcase. Are you familiar with the quote? I like my suitcase?
No. Sorry.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So,
More backstory.
Barron Trump. This clip was released probably like right before the election of Barron Trump on, I think it's Entertainment Tonight, doing this little like bit with his mom, just kind of talking about their life. This was way before they were in politics. But he's speaking and he has the cutest little accent, just like his mom's. And he goes, I like my suitcase. And it's so cute. And the sound went like so viral because he says, I like my suitcase. Do I want to go to school now? And it's like so funny. I can't even, you have to look this up, okay? I can't do it justice. But they turned that clip into a song. And this is like,
obviously,
if you grew up when I did, this was like peak comedy for like the meme of the moment to be turned into a song. Like, did you listen to Hide Your Kids, Hide Your Wife back in the day?
Just going to ask that.
Yes!
That specifically. And then there was, oh my gosh. Oh, It was just like that.
There was like,
I got bronchitis. Ain't nobody got time for that. That song
yes!
was such a banger. There were like choirs clapping.
That is so funny. I was thinking too, like, I think Double Rainbow. Do you remember Double Rainbow? Oh my God.
No.
That might have had a song. So anyway, this form of peak comedy, as I thought growing up as a child, like Hide Your Kids, Hide Your Wife,
Incredible.
as a song, has come back
Thank God.
to the new youth generation, and they made I Like My Suitcase a song, and I've been singing it all morning. That was literally the whole point of this saga, was that I've been singing I Like My Suitcase all morning. Okay, I'm gonna play it for you.
Please.
I got it right here. Ready?
Yeah.
And they put it to Trump dancing.
at
Here
it
you
go.
see 1.1 million likes.
Wow. A million likes. That's hilarious.
I have to go to school now? Like, this is peak comedy.
so
I am
cute.
dying. It's so,
Oh my
you gotta watch the
God.
original video too. It's adorable. But yeah, so I'm in a great mood all morning. I've been like, I like my suitcase, like dancing around. Yeah.
I
Everything's
love that
going
of
well.
like all of the like pop culture trends to come back from like 10, 15 years ago. The memes turning into songs. I'm really
I
glad
love
that
that.
that's.
I know.
that
I
that's
don't
coming
know.
back.
Like, I haven't seen that anywhere else recently
Yeah.
until I saw that. And I was like, oh my God. It just brought back the Hide Your Kids. It's just like such good memories. I
you
love it.
said that, and I could literally start hearing one of those songs
Yep.
playing in my head. Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's so ingrained.
It was like those early-ish YouTube days where
Yeah.
whatever was like big was big with everyone. You
Yeah.
know, now people
Yeah.
like have these different
It's
niches.
so
but
niche. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. But back then, if something was big, it was
it was big.
That
with
was like the only
everyone.
thing.
Yeah,
that you were
you all
seeing.
saw it. So yeah, I like my
That was a really
suitcase.
fun trip down memory lane. Let's move on to more serious topics.
I suppose.
Our first story from Kathryn Wigfall is about the St. Paul Teachers Union. I guess last month they put out this call, a resolution for the U.S. to put an arms embargo on Israel, and they're getting some pushback now. And I guess they're facing calls for some anti-Semitism training, which is...
Yeah, I went and looked at. I wanted to look at the actual like what they signed. This national arms embargo letter.
Yeah, because it was the National Union that sent it, right? And they just like signed on.
Yes, I
Right,
believe
okay.
so. And so basically, it's like this long thing that says, we call upon your administration to immediately halt all military aid to Israel, it's to the Biden administration,
Okay.
as part of the work to secure an immediate and permanent ceasefire in the war in Gaza. That's the main thing. So it just,
Yeah.
we want to cut U.S. military aid to the Israeli government.
Right.
Well, okay, so I think a lot of people might see that and think that's like not so bad, and maybe that's what the people who signed this to think. Like, everyone wants a ceasefire, you know?
Everyone
like,
wants peace.
Everyone
Yeah.
wants peace, of course. No one's arguing over world peace, literally.
Yeah.
That's what everyone wants. But the question, I think, is what would this do? Like, what would happen if the U.S. actually just stopped sending any kind of aid to Israel?
Sure.
Obviously, we don't know, but I think, you know, what would happen is Hamas wouldn't stop. You know, nothing would stop coming from the other side.
Yeah.
So, you know, Israel can agree to a ceasefire, but why is a terrorist organization going to agree to a ceasefire? That's
Yeah.
not what they want. That's not in their best interest. Like, Israel does want to stop fighting, not the terrorist organization,
Yeah.
who has explicitly said their goal is to wipe Jews off of the planet.
Yeah, you know, the instigators. In this
Yeah, they
conflict.
don't want to stop fighting. So, yeah, you can have one side agree to the ceasefire, but what about the other guys?
Yeah.
So, I don't know.
It's a very
It's just
simplistic
like,
way of looking at it. Yeah.
world peace. Well, of course, but that's not what's going to happen when we're dealing with evil people, terrorists.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. It's just so silly to me. I don't know that like anti-Semitism training is like going to get to the root of this problem. I think there's like a lack of understanding about the conflict that people don't understand.
Sure.
I don't think it's like inherent anti-Semitism from people in America. It certainly is for, terrorists over in Gaza, Hamas. Certainly it sparks from, racism. But I don't know if that's what is happening with these, these members of the St. Paul Teachers Union. I don't think they're going into this thinking like, I just hate the Jews and don't like Israel. I really don't think so. I think they just think they're arguing for world peace and they don't understand that this would lead to so much destruction. If Israel stopped fighting, it would get so much worse, in a lot of ways. And so, I don't know. I don't know if some kind of online training is really the answer. But
sure. I just thought it was nice to see some pushback. Because I feel like
Absolutely,
teachers unions do stuff like this all the time, these like wide, sweeping resolutions.
Yeah.
And it was nice to see, kind of like a respected organization like the Jewish Community Relations Council come out and say, hey, this is not okay.
Right, as they should. Absolutely. It's just so absurd that like the teachers union gets involved in anything like this. And this was like a local segment, but like why?
Excellent point. What is a teachers union doing? Calling for an arms embargo.
Do you think this was going to seal the deal? Like Biden sees you sign on to this and is like,
so funny.
Wow, the St. Paul teachers have spoken. I've changed my mind.
Let me call Israel right now.
What?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't get it. Like,
stay in your lane. Like,
separate these forms of activism. If the vast majority of people involved in the St. Paul Teachers Union want to go and get together and sign on to this resolution, so be it. But why are you lumping in all of your teachers with this? And I think this is why we're seeing this exodus of teachers from the teachers union.
Yes.
I think it's pretty clear. I mean, not everyone wants their political opinions decided by, the leaders of their local union. Of course not.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, definitely going to look at the state, because this is the local St. Paul's union, but like the state union, Education Minnesota, they spend only 25% of their union dues on representational activities. That is an insane statistic. If you are a teacher and you are paying dues to your union, I would assume all of it is going to represent me. What else are you doing?
9% chance?
And
like
the
maybe
answer,
there's admin costs? I don't know.
And the answer is political activism. I mean, that's what so much of it goes towards.
Yeah. And vast amounts of money. Huge amounts of money.
Amounts of money.
Especially here in Minnesota. I mean, Education Minnesota is just so...
it's a behemoth.
Nefarious. It's so politically motivated.
Yeah.
So, the NEA also has a lot of issues. I know, like, a couple years back, they voted on a resolution that basically... Yeah, someone's got to fact check me, but like abortion, they're like pro-abortion, Pro-choice is the way to go, no matter what. Well, why? You think you're speaking for every single teacher in the whole country? There's no way.
Yeah.
So why? But luckily, I mean, teachers are seeing where their money's going, and they're speaking out. They recently, the Education Minnesota had to raise dues, I think last year.
Yeah.
Because they're losing money. So
teachers leave, so,
good
let's
for
raise
teachers.
dues.
There's other ways, too. There's other ways to get your insurance. There's other ways to make sure your voice is heard and negotiating your contract and things like that. So
yeah, they are definitely not the only option.
No, they're not the only option.
To learn more, go to www.educatedteachersmn.com.
Yes, absolutely.
That was so exciting, though. This has been a battle we've been fighting for several years now, Kathryn specifically.
It used to be forced. Remember, not long ago, only a couple years ago, it was you were required to be in the union. Absurd. But, you were until the Janus decision forced to be in the union. Now you have 1 month a year, only 1 month when teachers can opt out of the union. They make it as difficult as possible, but you can do it.
Yeah.
As is your right, you should be able to.
Yeah. Let's move on. Our second story comes from David Semmer, who puts out kind of like a public safety news wrap-up once a week on the website. There's always so many interesting stories in here. The headline this week was Minneapolis homeless encampment fire takes out neighboring home. This was such a sad story. Minneapolis continues to let these homeless encampments exist and kind of fester in these residential areas. And unfortunately, crime goes up. And I mean, he was saying this is the second fire that's happened at one of these homeless encampments
and the other stat
in like a few months.
Yeah, the other stat he put in here is no fewer than 8 murders occurring in and around these encampments over the past year in Minneapolis.
Yeah, I mean, you've got residents, neighbors in this story saying, like, no one hears us, it's going to keep on happening, and no one does anything. And I just feel like this is the tale as old as time with Minneapolis. This is the story again and again and again. The residents say, we don't feel heard, something's wrong, no one's helping us. Like, why are you listening?
And their solutions are so misguided. They're like,
yes,
we can't, we don't want to force these people to have no place to go.
Yeah.
The reason people are here, as David Zimmer talks about in this article, is because they are in a place here where they can, unfortunately, use drugs, and they're enabled to use drugs, particularly fentanyl.
Yeah.
And when you go to, any kind of other housing assistance, shelters, things like that, often they have a policy, you can't be using drugs in those spaces. You can't be on drugs in those spaces. That's unsafe. And so the reason they're in these kind of encampments is because that's where they can openly do drugs. And unfortunately, there are nonprofit organizations that give them resources like yurts. That's the source of this fire, was this yurt that a nonprofit gave them to live in, to be more comfortable as they do drugs, harmful for themselves and the people that they're around. I saw, a couple years ago, like the needles story was really big. These nonprofits, they'll give them clean needles to do drugs with, things like that. It's really misguided. You can understand in some ways where they're coming from.
It's good intentions.
You're obviously not getting to the root of the problem, though. You're making it worse, and it gives a place for this crime to fester. Instead, we should be devoting way more resources to helping them get off their addictions and get free from fentanyl and cutting off the fentanyl at the source.
Yes, where is the fentanyl coming from? How are they getting it? Those are the questions that we should be asking, not how do we get them food and shelter and other resources, because they already have those and they don't want them.
Yeah, and they deny those resources because they come with the stipulation that you have to stay clean off of drugs. Yeah. And so they need a different kind of help.
Yeah.
It's sad. It's really sad to see that kind of violence right in the middle of especially these neighborhoods and things like that.
And then sad to see city leadership not really doing anything about it. Like 8 people were displaced from their homes as a result of this fire. And one of the city council members was like, we'll get you an Airbnb. You're good. Like that.
Yeah.
What? I feel like I would be so offended if I went to my city council and I was like, hey, my home burned down because you won't shut down this homeless camp.
Talk about not getting to the root of the problem. Like, we'll put you in an Airbnb. Okay, but
long term, like, can we stop this from happening again?
Everyone who knows about this topic agrees on the left and the right that encampments are unsafe, not the right way to go. You're not helping anyone by allowing these encampments to grow and fester. Everyone agrees on all sides. I find that very interesting. There's not a lot of topics like that.
There's just no debate on it.
Minneapolis leadership, people like councilperson Jason Chavez, who found the Airbnbs for these homeowners that were displaced.
But it's so sad. It's so upsetting.
It's awful. They don't listen to the people who know that this isn't good for anyone.
Yeah. Let's go on to our last and biggest story, I feel like, of the week. Feeding Our Future 2.0. The FBI raided 2 autism clinics, one in Minneapolis and one in St. Cloud, I believe. But there are rumors that as many as 9 locations were being targeted by the FBI for like insane amounts of, again, federal Medicaid fraud.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Super interesting. I mean, it's the ways that people are able to fraudulently take money from the government are interesting to me, because it's always in a place where it's like in a feel-good sort of
That's so true.
You know what I mean? It's like couched in this feel-good sort of thing. So the first one was the free food, free food for kids who normally got it in schools that are now closed because of COVID. That was really the origin of that Feeding Our Future scandal. And it was people who said, oh, we'll do that. We're a nonprofit. We'll do that. We'll feed kids. We'll feed people who are hungry and need food. And then they didn't. They stole the money. They didn't give food to, not everyone, but the Feeding Our Future, the fraudsters.
Taking advantage of
took advantage of that system. To a huge amount of money, a huge degree. And now we see they're doing it again when it comes to autism clinics. People in the government wanting to have resources in our community for people with disabilities are being taken advantage of by fraudsters. It's so sad.
It's so gross, because who wants to think when you're looking at like a charity or a nonprofit like that, that person could be committing fraud.
But this is also why you'll see, especially in Minnesota, we have a huge problem with all of this government money going to unregulated nonprofits. This is so funny because, we're a profit, but I've never considered like, should there are some of these nonprofits that exist because the government gives them all of their funds. We don't do that. Like, we don't take government money. We take it from donors, people who want to support our mission, who are, you know, seeing what we're doing and like it and agree with it and think we're doing a good job. They hold us to account by looking at our public, you know, records and things like that.
And if we lost their support, we would not continue to exist in the same way.
Exactly.
We are dependent on the support of people in a way
right.
that so many nonprofits are.
All of these nonprofits that exist out there that are not in that same boat, they get all of their funding from the government, and it's really unchecked. Like, they don't have a good system of keeping tabs on, you know, the way like Feeding Our Future, they would show these forged kind of invoices and things that were so absurd.
Made up names.
Did people think, did this
was no one looking at this
test apparently? Which is crazy. So
there was one case here where one of these clinics was billing someone for in-person services. And that person was like overseas on the date that they were being billed for.
Yeah.
Like, absolutely, like, blatantly false information. So easily verifiable.
Yeah.
It just makes you think, like, are they really not checking any of this? Is someone not reading over any of this? And they're getting millions of dollars. I mean, the quantities of money that were being given out. In 2017, total Medicaid funds paid out in this area, $1.2 million. 7 years later, 2024, $228 million. That is how fast it balloons. That is an insane increase, an insane amount of money.
That's
it's not being watched? It's not being checked?
You have to ask why this growth has happened too, and the money that the legislature here in Minnesota is giving to nonprofits.
Yeah.
Why are they getting such an exorbitant amount of money for these nonprofits? Do you think it's because there are people who they know that work in these nonprofits, who run these nonprofits, who are
like, how are they giving out
from
these
the fraud
contracts? Oh, interesting.
Well, if you look at, like, Bill Glenn has tracked, you know, the political donations of some of the people involved in the Feeding Our Future scandal.
Yeah.
They're about who you'd expect they go to. The people who are in the legislature making the decision that our nonprofits, the ones that are approved by the government, those nonprofits, should be getting more money. I think it is kind of like a self-benefiting cycle, right? You know, like, we'll hand you money from the legislature, you hand us campaign funds. Okay, allegedly, I won't, you know, I'm not accusing anyone directly of anything, but that's what it looks like, I think.
Yeah.
Because look at this an absurd growth in the amount of money going to these unchecked nonprofits. And when you tie it back to who's getting this money fraudulently, the people, the politicians.
It's hard to not look at that and and wonder if there's a reason. Yeah.
So it's tough. Thank you to the people who are out there doing this work, running autism clinics, providing services for people with disabilities. Who are doing that work and doing it well. I'm sorry that there's some fraudsters in your midst.
Yeah, it is. It's sad. It'll be interesting to see what comes of this, if they're going to raid more clinics. And
yeah, it will be. I mean, obviously, this is kind of like Feeding Our Future was like the dribble, slow drip, and then it blew into a huge thing. So we'll see if there's more to come.
Yeah.
Obviously, I hope not, but.
Yeah. Let's move on to something a little bit more fun.
Well, I thought for the last thing we talked about today, since we're not going to do an episode next week since it's Christmas, and a lot of people are probably in the same position as me where they haven't finished or maybe even started all of their Christmas shopping yet. We should talk about, what are you going to get for the people on your list that are left? Like, I don't know. You know, if you're in a family where you have some liberal relatives, I'm not in this kind of family personally. We don't have this.
That does not surprise me.
But if you are, maybe those are the people that are last on your list, you know, like an aunt. Maybe who really hates Trump or something like that. What are you going to get those people? I don't know. Do you have any ideas, Grace?
My one idea is like a lump of coal.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. It's probably deserved.
Yeah.
I think you could go a couple different routes with that. You know, like you could do something really obvious, right? Like, I found this great pillow on Etsy that'll get here in time. And it's one of those like sequin ones. Yeah. So if you put it one way, it's sequins. Nice. And then if you put your hand up, it's a picture of RFK Jr.'s face, like really big on the pillow. And so I feel like you could give them the pillow. Yeah. And they'd be like, thanks, sequin pillow. Cool. Yeah. And then they get home and they kind of move it around. Boom. RFK Jr. is on their couch. Nice. I think that's pretty funny. And it comes in time.
Thank God.
That's a good one. You could also go, this is also kind of an RFK Jr. route, but another subtle one, but expensive. You could get like a reverse osmosis water filter.
What?
Okay, this is how you get fluoride out of your water. So if you really want to trigger the libs in your family, you could be like, you really need this. You need to get the fluoride out of your water. You know what I'm saying? Like kind of like a subtle, that could really get to them.
That is so specific.
Yeah, I don't know.
So I assume expensive. I love it. I love it. Like, it's a great
expensive.
gift. It's a great
I
gift.
know it's expensive because I've looked into it unironically.
I want one
Yeah.
someday. Yeah.
But I feel like that would maybe get to them. Same with like, I mean, a more obvious route, of course, would be like, I found this Joe Rogan mug.
Okay.
You know, the libs now, of course, hate Joe Rogan. It says Rogan for president.
Nice.
Make America high again. I could kind of throw them off. Like, whose side are you on? You know, I don't know. I like that one.
It's a good stocking stuffer, yeah.
Yeah, good stocking stuffer. If there's anything else, you know, that you can think of. Oh, here's my last one. It's on Amazon. It is a Trump outfit for your dog.
Oh.
And let me tell you, this thing has 781 ratings.
You've got the wig.
4.5 stars. Someone's like knitting these things at home, or not knitting, but look at that. Look at this. What is this? This is, I don't know.
The hair is
looks
killing me.
handmade, but
this,
people love it.
Chihuahua thing. Wow.
And look at this. You can put it on a cat.
Oh my gosh.
You can put it on a cat.
Well, I'm sold. I know what I'm
so
getting
if you
back
have a cat lover in your life who is also maybe a, you know, lean lefter, give them a little Trump wig, perhaps, for their kitty. I mean, look at this. This is so freaking funny. It comes with a tie, and it's got a little thing. And I'm telling you, 781 ratings, like, that's a lot. A lot of people are getting this.
That's a shocking
They've sold
amount,
thousands of these.
Yeah.
Unique style.
It is a unique style.
You're telling me. That is a unique style.
What else could you say about this? Yeah.
If you have any other thoughts, what should people get their liberal relatives this Christmas? The people that are left on their list, drop them in the comments. We're on Twitter, X, Instagram, TikTok, wherever you see this. You can even comment on Spotify. YouTube, thank you, duh. Yeah, go to YouTube, watch the Suitcase song, then watch our podcast, and leave a comment. What are you getting your liberal relatives?
Well, I have so many ideas now. Now I regret getting my shopping done early. I suppose I can still get the wig for my cat.
Yes,
so,
definitely. Definitely. It says free delivery by Monday, December 23rd. So you're cutting it close, but
it'll get there just in time. Thank you, Amazon.
Christmas.
Please sponsor us.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for joining us. Merry Christmas in advance. Stay tuned for the second half of this episode, which is going to be so interesting.
Yeah, stick around. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
American Experiment is supported by thousands of individuals like you. To join the movement, go to www.americanexperiment.org and click the yellow donate button. From all of us here, thank you.
Welcome, everybody. I'm John Hinderaker, and with me today is John Phelan. John is an economist at Center of the American Experiment. But John, you moved here from London, 6, 7 years ago now. It's been a while. And we're new to Minnesota, of course, new to the United States. But you took a real interest in Minnesota history.
Yeah. Friedrich von Hayek said that you can't be a good economist if you're only an economist. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. I'm not one of these people who believes that there's no validity to economic theory, that things will work differently in different places at any time. I do believe that there are sort of economic uniformities across time and across space. But at the same time, the economy it happens in the real world. So you have to understand these things. And I think, more broadly, when you look at Center of the American Experiment's history, our founder, Mitch Pearlstein, used to use a phrase, a culture of prosperity, which is a broader thing than just kind of marginal tax rates or particular regulations or something. And I did a report last year now on social capital, and how Minnesota's high level of social capital, essentially Minnesotans, however they vote, live very conservative lives. But these high levels of social capital are a big part of why Minnesota is as prosperous as it is. And so you've got to understand, where does social capital come from? It evolves. Where does it evolve from, and where does it evolve in? The answer is history. All of us are the product of what's gone before. So really, we have to understand what it was that went before.
So you've written a whole series of articles about Minnesota history that we've published in our magazine, Thinking Minnesota. How many now? Like 6, 7, 8? How many have you done?
Might be about that, yeah. They started off, initially the first one I wrote was something about Prohibition. It was the 100th anniversary of Prohibition, I think. Andrew Volstead, who was the moving force behind that, was from Minnesota. So there was a local angle to it. And also it illustrated some kind of economic concepts. So I thought that was an interesting, it was just you could illustrate some economic ideas with history. But it's kind of evolved a bit since then. I did an article on the Dakota War of 1862, for example, because it seems to me that all anybody knows about that is that 38 people were executed at the end of it, which, I mean, is a hell of a lot more to the story than that. And that needs to be told, because, I mean, George Orwell said that, he who controls the present controls the past, and who controls the past controls the future. And there's a lot of truth in that, because people who don't know their past are liable to end up almost anywhere. And so, for example, if you look at Minnesota's history, there is an attempt at the moment to recast it as a story of kind of, just racism from start to finish. And there's all sorts of modern policy things that flow from that, like reparations bills, for example. So, this isn't just, there is a real kind of, policy element to all this.
Well, here's an example, John. Just recently we've seen the changes made in the Minnesota state flag and the Minnesota state seal. And the state seal, which also used to be the state flag, had a number of things on it. It had the pioneer plowing, the Indian on horseback, the waterfall, the setting sun, and so on. It had the state's motto, L'Étoile du Nord, the North Star in French, and at the bottom, the date, 1858. Well, 1858 is when Minnesota joined the Union. And that was taken off by the committee that redesigned the state seal and the state flag. And one of the committee members explained they took it off because that was nothing to be proud of, nothing to celebrate. It was a disaster that Minnesota joined the Union. And so we don't want that date being commemorated. And I think this is the kind of thing you're talking about. There is a battle going on over American history and here in Minnesota over Minnesota history. And the reality, of course, is that Minnesota joined the Union just in time to fight in the Civil War and, in fact, to fight heroically in the Civil War. And let's talk about that. So I think a couple of issues ago, you did a piece on the 1st Minnesota Volunteer Regiment at Gettysburg, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of the famous one.
Yeah.
When Lincoln put out the call for volunteers after Fort Sumter, coincidentally, the very first regiment that was volunteered, a guy from Minnesota, was it Sibley?
I think it was, yeah. He was visiting Washington, D.C., and he knew the Secretary of War personally.
Yeah, I think he bumped into Lincoln on the street, or maybe it was Stanton. But anyway, he just shortly after the call went out, he committed a volunteer regiment from Minnesota. It was the first volunteers committed to the Union cause. And that regiment, the 1st Minnesota Volunteers, went down in history in large part because of the role that they played at the Battle of Gettysburg. But there were a lot more Minnesota regiments than that one.
Mm. Yeah, there was something like 10 or 11 regiments. Can't remember exactly. But a huge proportion of Minnesota's male population, particularly its white male population, volunteered. It's worth remembering, that the draft was not brought in for some time during the Civil War. And that, the first number of regiments, particularly the ones that I talk about in these articles, were all volunteer regiments. These were guys who, volunteered, and particularly the regiments raised in 1862. Which is a number of the ones that I write about in this article. By that point, it was clear that this war wasn't going to be over by Christmas or something like that. Bull Run had happened. And so it was fairly clear that you were facing some hard fighting. So these guys weren't off on some kind of, cruise or something like this. They knew what lay ahead.
I think in your article here about the Battle of Nashville, I think you say that about 10% of the white male population, in other words, non-Indian population of Minnesota at that time, volunteered and served in these volunteer regiments. When the 1st Minnesota was formed and volunteered, they got on a railroad train, they went east, and they fought in all the major engagements, or a lot of the major engagements in the Eastern Theater of War, culminating at Gettysburg. And after Gettysburg, so many were killed or wounded that they basically ceased to exist as a regiment, but they went east because they volunteered so early that it was before the Union government had developed the plan of having soldiers from the east fight in the east and soldiers from the west fight in the west. And so all of the Minnesota regiments after the 1st got assigned to the Western armies.
I think I'm correct in saying that the 1st Minnesota were the only regiment from west of the Mississippi to fight in the Eastern Theater. And yeah, you're absolutely right. They fought in all these major battles. One thing that's really striking when you read about the history of these things, and this applies to all these regiments, is they started off with 1,000 men. enlisted. But by the time you get to the Battle of Gettysburg, they're going into battle with a couple of hundred guys or 150 guys. And you think, well, what's happened here? And what would happen is that they would go through battle after battle and they would lose huge numbers of men. So the first Minnesota, they fought at First Bull Run, they fought at Antietam. They would have fought at Fredericksburg, but their commander disobeyed an order to attack. So thankfully, that was a famous disaster in the Civil War. But by the time they got to Gettysburg, there were very few of them left because they didn't replace men. They just ran the units down.
And then they suffered 84% casualties in the suicide charge at Gettysburg.
Which is the highest rate of casualties I think that any U.S. unit has ever suffered in one engagement.
In the history of the United States.
Yeah. But you do have to remember that was there wasn't to a regiment of 1,000 guys. It had been 1,000 guys in 1861 when they fought at Bull Run, but by the time they got to Gettysburg, they'd been through these charnel houses in the meantime. So when you look at some of the Western battles like Gettysburg, you're looking at the numbers there, and the numbers are actually higher. There's no share like there is of the first Minnesota at Gettysburg, but the numbers are higher.
So let's talk now about the subject of your current article in Thinking Minnesota, which is the Battle of Nashville. Maybe just set the stage in terms of, well, first of all, the Battle of Nashville was in 1864, right? So it's in the last, year and a half or whatever of the Civil War. So there's a lot of water over that dam. So what's the strategic situation? What's going on at that point in the war?
Well, it's interesting to compare, I think, the Eastern and the Western theatre. In the Eastern theatre, the war started off with mutual attempts to grab the other side's capital. And the idea was to win it quickly with a knockout blow. And it was, to some extent, the kind of biggest game of, catch the flag that you've ever seen. But what happened in the West was very different. The Western commanders the Eastern commanders perhaps had a more European idea of warfare, a pre-Napoleonic idea, certainly, which was that you grab some capital city and then dictate terms or something like this, which is what Napoleon had done early in his wars. But if you look at the Western conception of war, the officers there, people like Sherman, people like Grant, they had a very different conception of the war, which is that you wouldn't win it quickly by just, grabbing some city or grabbing some guy. It was that you had to look at the war in its totality. You had to break down the opposition. You had to bring the full weight of your economy and society to bear. And it's interesting to think, the Confederates, particularly with Lee in the East, if ever they could have reduced the Civil War to a clash between armies, the Confederates had maybe a 1 in 3 chance of winning. But whenever it became a struggle between societies and economies, the North could only win. The Confederates are never going to win that war. And what the commanders in the West had, I think, was an idea of total war. It was, post-Napoleonic. It looked forward to the First World War.
Well, Grant is generally regarded as the father of modern warfare.
Yeah, and which is slightly unfair to him in some respects, because so, for example, one of the battles that I write about in here, because there was a big Minnesota presence, was Vicksburg. And Grant is often kind of regarded as a kind of proto-Western Front First World War slogger. Frontal assaults and all the rest.
Well,
of
not by me,
but there was a lot more to the guy than that. I mean, he could fight a battle of maneuver, which is exactly what he did at Vicksburg.
Yeah, Vicksburg was a brilliant campaign,
a masterpiece. Yeah, absolutely. And again, a very heavy Minnesota contingent there. I think the first unit into the city was a Minnesota unit.
So by the time we get to Nashville, which is the next year, 1864, Vicksburg, of course, fell on July 4th, 1863. So where are we at? What's the strategic situation there, kind of in that Tennessee, Kentucky area?
The Western War is, to some extent, I think one of the reasons it's less remembered than the Eastern War is because it's harder to sum up. Simply, there's a lot more fighting over a much bigger area. So it's difficult to kind of boil it down to its essentials. But if I had to do it, I would say that essentially what happened was the drive down the Mississippi to cut the Confederacy in two, which was achieved by the middle of 1863 with the fall of Vicksburg, when Port Hudson, I think, was captured a few days after that. The Mississippi was a Union River all the way up to Lake Itasca. And what you had then is you kind of move east, and then the Union drove south further east in that way. And that's when they drove down to Atlanta. They captured Atlanta in September 1864.
And then Sherman marches to the sea.
Yeah. Well, this is what happened. So as they were driving down into Georgia, they captured Atlanta. And by this point, what had been happening at that point is the Confederate commander Johnston had been fighting a kind of Fabian rearguard action, which in all fairness to him was all he could do. He was heavily outnumbered. The Confederate armies were melting away by this point. Guys were just going home. They were ill-fed, unpaid. Many of them didn't have shoes even. Don't forget the Battle of Gettysburg was to some extent caused by the Confederate Army looking for some shoes. But so what was happening as they were advancing south is Johnston was trying to kind of delay and postpone. So he was retreating, fighting. And Jefferson Davis hated this. He also hated Johnson personally. There was an awful lot of backstabbing that went on between Jefferson Davis and his various commanders. And so he sacked Johnston after Atlanta fell and put in place instead John Bell Hood, who was thought to be a kind of fighting general, and he certainly was.
He was. John Bell Hood, in the Monty Python, one of those movies, Life of Brian or something, the knight who gets arms and legs chopped off and claims it's only a flesh wound.
Yeah.
Who's that? Do you remember his name? The
Knight of the Black Knight
or something. I don't know. Well, John Bell Hood was kind of like that. By the end of the war, he had suffered multiple major wounds, did not have a lot of limbs left.
Yeah.
He was a pretty heroic guy personally.
Well, yeah, but what happened is Atlanta fell and Hood was put in charge of the Confederate Army out there. And what could he do? I mean, there was a huge Union force in Atlanta, massively outnumbered his own, was much better supplied. Furthermore, there were Union troops in the rearward areas that could be brought forward. So he didn't really have much to do. I mean, Johnston had essentially had the right idea. All you could do was try and delay the inevitable. What Hood did was he conceived a kind of bold strategy, which that he would completely ignore what had just happened, the fall of Atlanta, and just march north. The Confederates had done this occasionally. They tried to kind of, just rush north and draw Union forces up, and that had worked occasionally. But what happened this time? The Union, by this time, they could afford to send an army after Hood and continue the drive to the sea, which Sherman undertook. So that's what he did when he found out that Hood had gone north. Initially, Sherman followed him for a bit and then thought, I don't need to do this. So he split his force, and Sherman went off back towards the sea, the march through Georgia. And the army under Thomas went north to Nashville to chase Hood.
The Rock of Chickamauga.
Indeed, which is another great Minnesota battle.
But we're talking now after Chickamauga. Right?
Yes, Chickamauga was 1863, and that was really the Confederacy's one big victory in the West. And the only reason it wasn't a complete disaster is because Thomas's division held firm, while the rest of the army crumbled under this assault. Thomas's division held firm, and again, it was a unit with a very heavy Minnesota contingent in it.
Yeah, they figure largely in all these battles. So Thomas is sent north to pursue Hood, while Sherman takes the main force east, according to his original plan, marching to the sea. Yeah.
And what happened, I mean, so very often you'll read about the Battle of Franklin, Nashville, and these two battles are kind of conflated. And what happened is Hood was marching north. Franklin's just kind of south of Nashville. And Hood marched north, and and his only hope was to try and beat the Union army directly in front of him before Thomas arrived with the rest of the force. So he attacked the Union army in front of him at Franklin and failed completely. I mean, Hood was not a very good battle commander. So he completely messed this battle up. He actually came off worse. He was trying to attack an entrenched superior force in numbers, and it was a complete disaster. And to some extent, losing the Battle of Franklin lost the Battle of Nashville. And the Confederate army was so shattered at the end of the Battle of Franklin that when Thomas's army came up alongside them and they were strung out on the march, any commander would tell you that that's the perfect time to attack an army because you can chop them to pieces. They were too exhausted to do it. And they just watched the army march past up north. They pulled together with the guys from Franklin. They went into Nashville. And so, the Union Army under Thomas, the big Minnesota contingent, was in Nashville facing Hood outside to the south at the start of December 1864.
And so how did the battle develop then?
Well, this is an interesting one because Thomas would not fight the battle I mean, there was very little chance that Hood would attack him because he was outnumbered, and Thomas was dug in a very good position. But at the same time, Thomas was a very, very careful commander. He was a lot like the Duke of Wellington or somebody. Thomas would not fight a battle until he was sure he was going to win. He would tilt the odds as far in his favor as he could before he fought. And this did not endear him to an awful lot of people. Grant, by this point, was in D.C. as kind of overall supremo of the armies. And all through the first 2 weeks of December, he was sending Thomas in Nashville these letters saying, attack these people. They're on their last legs. Go for it. Go for it. And Grant was terrified that Hood would retreat and the war would go on.
Let's just pause for a moment here, because you've talked a little bit about the fact that the North had resources that the South just couldn't match. Above all, resources of population. They could replace troops. It was a lot harder for the South with its smaller population. But if you look at the overall strategic position, even into 1864, the Union was in peril because there was a presidential election coming up in November of 1864. As it turned out, the Democratic candidate was General George McClellan, the original failed Union general in the East, who was running on a platform of ending the Civil War and letting the Southern states go. And right up until near the end, there was a very real chance that McClellan would win that election, Lincoln would lose, the Civil War would end, and the South would be permitted to secede. And so the victories that were won in 1864, above all, probably the capture of Atlanta, gave voters in the North the sense that finally we are actually winning this war. Because bear in mind that particularly in the Eastern Theater, which is where most of the population was, the war had not gone well.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of great victories for the Union. And so there was a considerable defeatist sentiment. Let's sue for peace. Let's bring the war to an end. Let's let the Confederate States go. And so these Union victories, the South, even though they couldn't really win on the battlefield, they were not in that weak a strategic position. If they could keep the war going and avoid really massive losses, there was a real chance that McClellan would beat Lincoln in the 1864 election and the war would be brought to, from their standpoint, a successful end.
Yeah, I mean, beyond a certain point, the South's best hope, I think, was to try and win the battle at the Northern Ballot Box.
Right.
The Battle of Antietam had come about in 1862. Lee had invaded the North, and that was generally seen as being an attempt to influence the 1862 elections. It's quite incredible now to look back and think that, to some extent, electoral politics proceeded as normal during this Civil War. It's quite extraordinary, really. But yeah, so the situation at the start of December is that Grant is very concerned that Hood is going to slip away and the chance to destroy his army will be gone. And at one point, actually, he does sack Thomas. But when he finds out that Thomas is all poised to go, he retracts the order and puts his trust in him once again. And Thomas does eventually attack Hood's army to the south of Nashville on December 15th, 1864. And this is, the Battle of Nashville itself, the two-day conflict.
So this is what we're coming up on a commemoration of here next week.
Yeah. Sunday and Monday, the 160th anniversaries of this battle. And what happened is Hood's army was kind of arrayed to the south of Nashville. And it was there was such a preponderance of Union forces at this point that they could afford to attack everywhere at once. But what they did is initially Thomas sent an attack with his left. So that went in against the Confederate right. And that attack kind of misfired. And some people say it was a ruse or a distraction. Some people say it was just a misfire. Either way, when he attacked with the Union right, which is where the Confederates were, where the Minnesotans were, sorry, they went hard against the Confederate left and broke it. And the Confederate army just broke on that day on December the 15th, and they fell back south to another position, which was anchored on Shies Hill. The left of their position was on Shies Hill.
And you, in your article in Thinking Minnesota, you quote a historian who says that this instance that you just mentioned was the only major battle of the war in which a Confederate army was completely broken and disorganized.
Yeah, because on December 16th, so this is the day after the victory on the 15th, Thomas goes again with essentially the same plan, where he sends the Minnesotans on the right flank against the Confederate left, up Shies Hill. So these guys are going uphill, they're attacking. And I mean, these Confederates, at this point, they're in a difficult situation, outnumbered, badly supplied and all the rest of it, and badly led, you could argue as well. But they're tough guys.
They're very tough.
I mean, at this point in the war, they're some of the most seasoned combat veterans around.
And these are some of the best soldiers the world has seen.
Yeah.
These Confederate soldiers were tough.
Yeah, and so this is no cakewalk. And that's shown in the in the casualty rolls. The casualties taken by the Minnesotans going up Shies Hill actually were more Minnesotans died in that assault than died in the charge of the first regiment at Gettysburg in 1863. So December 16th, 1864 was Minnesota's bloodiest day in the Civil War. They broke the Confederate Army, and as that historian Donald R. Brock said, the Confederate Army just melted away. It shattered. And that didn't happen on any other battlefield. The Confederates might have been beaten, but they managed to pull away. At Nashville, they were completely shattered, and the war in the West effectively was over with this victory, and it was won very largely by Minnesotans. In fact, if you look at the casualties of the entire Union Army for the two-day Battle of Nashville, Minnesotan soldiers accounted for 10% of all of them.
So effectively, that ended the war in the West.
Yes.
And then the war wrapped up with Grant's assaults repeated down, starting in the Wilderness, and then Spotsylvania Courthouse and Cold Harbor, and all the way down to Petersburg. And they encircled the Confederates there, almost encircled them over the winter. And that the Lee's army in the East really melted away in considerable part over the winter as people were going home. In the spring, then they resumed the fighting and drove the Confederates out of Richmond. And it wasn't long before we had Lee surrendering at Appomattox Courthouse and the war being brought to an end. And then, of course, subsequent surrender of Johnson's men down in North Carolina. So these battles we're talking about are really pivotal in the story of the Civil War.
Absolutely. And like I say, I think most people, if you ask anybody to name a Civil War battle, they'll probably name Gettysburg. I don't know how many would name many beyond that, possibly Vicksburg, Antietam, I think would be a big one. But the Battle of Nashville, as decisive as it was, it does seem to be kind of forgotten. It doesn't seem to me, the 160th anniversary is kind of a big thing. And looking around, I didn't see any kind of plan to commemorate or mark this event. And I think, these are guys who fought and died for this country. And, if you can't give them, a few minutes out of every 10 years to remember what they did, then it's a pretty sorry outlook.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. So on the 16th, which is next Monday, it was your idea to do this, and American Experiment has organized it, pulled it off. We are going to commemorate the 160th anniversary of the Battle of Nashville. Just describe that, if you would.
Yeah, I think of that line in Henry V, where Shakespeare has Henry V say the day before Agincourt, this story shall the good man teach his son. And it occurs to me, in many cases, that the good man or the bad man, very few men are teaching their children about this. Maybe they're not learning about it in schools either, and that somebody should be doing this, somebody should be marking this, and if nobody else will do it, you have to do it. That's responsibility, I suppose. And so, we're having an event at the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial in Summit Park in St. Paul, so fairly central location. We're going to have an event there. I think it starts at 11 o'clock and runs through to about 11:30. It should be pretty interesting. Hopefully the weather will be okay. But it was bad weather at the Battle of Nashville. So
yeah, that's right. We've got a speaker who's a historian, an expert on the Battle of Nashville. We're going to have, I think, a color guard. We have a number of veterans groups who are involved in the ceremony, and I think it's going to be a terrific commemoration of a very important moment in Minnesota history that a lot of people have forgotten.
Yeah, and it goes back to the point that, Minnesota's history is very largely something to be proud of. I wrote an article that was, originally I was going to write one article about Minnesota in the Civil War. And I ended up writing so much about the period up to it that I had to just stop at the start of the war. But writing about the history of abolitionism in Minnesota, is a fascinating one. And in the 1860 presidential election, only Delaware, I think, gave Lincoln a bigger share of its vote than Minnesota. This always was, kind of Lincoln, Republican.
Heavily abolitionist.
Abolitionist heartland, yeah. And attempts to paint a different story, I think, are hideously unfair.
Yeah. Well, there's a battle going on over America's history. And the left has tried to commandeer the narrative and portray that history in a negative light. And we see it all over the country, but we also see it in Minnesota. And there's an effort, I think, to portray Minnesota's history in a negative light. And I think that the articles that you've written in Thinking Minnesota are a great antidote to that, a much more realistic and balanced and on the whole positive portrayal of Minnesota's history.
Yeah, I try to be fair. No story is without dark moments and villains. But I think overall, this is a place to be proud of and a people to be proud of.
Let's leave it there for now and look forward to the celebration on the 16th.
Thank you.